Is it on? Is it on? Okay, good, good. Okay, yeah, my name is Mike Pondsmith. I am the guy who killed your cyberpunk character. And I'm also not just somebody who does cyberpunk. I've been, for the last 35 years or so, running a company called Artelsorian. It's primarily a tabletop game company, but we also, because of my background, dabble quite a bit in digital, which I think shocked the living daylights out of the CD Projekt guys when I first showed up. And they said, "You understand this?" I went, "Yeah, I've been doing it for the last 10 years. But that worked out very well because in the end, it really helped facilitate how we did things and how we ended up getting 2077 to actually work. And to also get something that, as you'll see as we talk, something that really looked and felt like the world that we created so many years ago. So without any further ado, let's take a quick look at what we've got. Everybody ready? Buckle your seatbelts, kids. Okay. Right. Looking at a franchise. Looking at a franchise from the other side. Okay. The reason I did this talk is that people have an idea of what we ended up doing that created Cyberpunk 2077, but they don't understand the background stuff. And as it turns out, my career has been spent dealing with franchises and other people's properties for years. We're going to be touching on a bunch of those today besides CD Projekt and Talsorian. I've done stuff with Star Wars, Matrix, you know, you name it. We've probably been doing something with it. And I've been on both sides. So I have been a creator, but I've also been the guy who has to implement it. And there are a lot of really interesting little things that come up when you have to implement an overall property or what we call a franchise. And I'll explain a bit more of that later as well. So let's get moving here. Looking at a franchise, or what? We have a franchise now? What is a franchise anyway, and how do I get one? Okay. I don't know how many of you really understand the idea, but what a franchise is when a property, an intellectual property, an IP expands beyond the initial location of it. So, for example, original Cyberpunk, mostly tabletop. Then it began to do books. Then we began to do some video stuff and so forth. When you have a lot of different agencies or groups who are producing content, that entire thing is basically considered to be what's called a franchise. They don't look at it as, oh yeah, it's a cyberpunk thing. They go, look at all this stuff, and it all goes back to that particular property, and that's the franchise, okay? A friend of mine who used to be in charge of Games Workshop's marketing told me years ago the idea was to, as he said, own the end cap. And that meant when you went into a store, the end cap is the part that is basically at the back end of the shelving units. And that's where the people who do bookstores and toy stores and video stores and so forth put their hot stuff. And they want to have it all together so that when you walk in, as he would describe, you see, you know, Games Workshop figures, Games Workshop books, Games Workshop this, that, clothes, music, you name it. The end cap. So yeah, Mike taught me a long time ago to own the end cap. Okay. Is anybody kind of confused about franchising? We'll keep going on that, okay? Everybody with me? No one's throwing anything, so I think we're going along fine. Okay, so that is what a franchise is. How you get one is organic in most cases. You do a project, and the project becomes a popular work of some form. Yeah, in our case, you know, we did tabletop and books and things like that. Believe it or not, there are cyberpunk books out there that aren't all CD Projekt. So when we did that, it began to build momentum. And as a concept or a property builds momentum, you get people who license and join on, you get people who get involved in it, and it becomes larger than what the initial thing was. So, you're dealing essentially with, for example, I did stuff in Star Wars, and at one point, I was working for a company called West End that did the tabletop stuff, and we would, let's say an example, somebody would come to us from LucasArts and they'd go, so, you said you wanted to have Lando Calrissian have something besides the Millennium Falcon to get around in. And we'd all go off and kind of go, what would he have? Well, he'd probably have something really cool and it'd be big. And the next thing you know, you have the Lady Luck, which is a big kind of super yacht that Lando was supposed to go around. And I remember being blown away when I walked into a toy store in San Francisco, and they had a licensor that did toys, and they had a model of the Lady Luck. And I went, whoa, we have arrived. Yay. We got toys now. We have action figures. So that is more or less how you get a franchise. Very rarely have I ever seen them start off where somebody says, we're going to have one. Instead, they tend to be organic. In fact, the only one I recall was many, many years ago. Yu-Gi-Oh! At one point was just a card game, and I went to an E3, which is a big show that most of you probably know about, since you're all in this business. And they showed up, and they showed us video, and they were showing us clothes, and they were showing us that thing that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has on his arm when he says, let's duel. That was all planned ahead of time. It doesn't happen very often, though. Hollywood would love to do that, but the way that franchises evolve, you're also looking for the right partners. You're looking for the right people to implement your IP or your vision thing. So let's keep moving. Okay, how do you get one? Well, like I said, they evolve. They happen around you. And we're going to talk about the various things that create that. And I'm also going to warn you that there's not a cure. If you end up with something like that, nobody sat down when George Lucas did Star Wars. Not even George went, hey, I think I'm going to have this going on for 40 years. No, he was going, thank God 21st Century Fox gave me funding to do this movie. I hope it doesn't fail. He's sitting on the beach with Steven Spielberg, and they're going, well, this will either make us or it's going to wreck our careers. So, cure? Maybe. But you're not sure you really want to. What you really want is to have that grouping of products, to own that end cap and understand how it works. Okay? So, there are a couple ways that you can deal with it if you own the IP, and hopefully all of you guys will one day have something that's so cool that everybody comes to you and says, I really want to do a video game, or I want to do a movie, or whatever. If you're lucky. There's a couple ways you can handle that, and I've worked with both sides. There's partnerships where you work with the people who basically created the idea. And then there's more hands-off, pay me the money, I'm good, get out of here. Most people don't specialize in the kinds of stuff we do in the video game market. So, to them it's an alien language, and they go, yeah, okay, just hand me a lot of money and you can go do what you want, okay? That works sometimes, but there is a problem, and that is that vision may shift around. A good example of that is Talsorian works in the Witcher franchise. So we do Witcher products. But the Witcher products we do, although we do them with CD Projekt, are not the same as what Sapkowski, for example, was doing with the Hollywood people. So the first time I saw the Witcher TV show, we're all sitting around the office, and we've got it up on the big screen, and we're going, wait, that's what that's supposed to look like? No. Over here, they said it looked like that. So there's a problem with that, and that's the problem you have with hands-off, pay me the money versus partnerships. But partnerships are a part luck, a part skill capability, and kind of an agreement between you and the people who want to create your stuff. Okay. If you do that second route and you're going to be more of a partners, that's going to be teamwork. And you're going to have to be prepared at that point to be involved. So, for example, going back to Star Wars stuff, Maximum George, as we used to call him, he didn't have time for that. At a certain point, he wasn't going to say Lando Calrissian's, ship looks like this. He didn't have time. George is running an empire. But we had dedicated people over at Lucasfilm who would tell us, and then tell us when we did stuff at LucasArts, yeah, you can do this, and this is what's kind of legal. I have a story where at one point we came up with this really great storyline for the tabletop that involved lightsabers, and all of a sudden in the middle of it we get a message in from Lucasfilm, and they say, George says you can't do that because he's got plans in the sequel, which was at that point, the second trilogy, and he's got lightsabers working like this, and they don't work anything like what you're talking about. And I looked over at my writing partner. I said, so the last 6 months just got thrown in a trash can. But that's George's. He gets to do that. So, if you're lucky, you're involved with the people who will be, me in this case, trying to put together stuff for video games and so forth. And you have to be prepared to be involved. Prepared to be involved means, for example, the fact that Art Helsorian is in Seattle, all the way the heck on the other side of the planet in the U.S. So you have to imagine this. All the CD guys that we're working on the dev team, they're sitting there in their office with the monitors up and all that, and they're dressed to go home. It's 4 o'clock or something like that where they are, and they're all going, Mike, can you stop talking for a while because we got to go back and feed the cat. But we're all sitting around at Talsorian, and this is all of us, and we're all sitting around and we're wearing our pajamas because for us it's 5 in the morning. That's being involved. The conversations we had started mere weeks after we began to put the deal together. We were doing that involvement with CD Projekt long before we even finished all the paperwork, because when you start off in that, you need to immediately make sure everybody's on the same page. Okay. You also have to realize with a franchise that it's not the same thing as just a one and done. You have to actually start thinking about how you're going to develop the stuff that you're doing. It's not enough to say, if you're doing a franchise, yeah, I'm going to do a video game, it's going to be like this. You may end up doing years of that particular product. Every year we have a huge summit that involves Talsorian and all the CD Projekt's partners and so forth, and they all meet up, and we plan 3, 4, 5 years ahead to figure out what we want to do, because it takes that long to get everything together. And one of the other reasons we have to do that is that developing it between the different media forms in a franchise is a long-term proposition. You've got to figure out what you're going to do. And there are several reasons for that, okay? The other thing you have is as you're developing between different media forms like books, music, TV, anime, you name it, is you also have to look at the expanse of that. It's huge. It used to be you just did a game, and everybody went, "Oh, great game. You going to do another one?" Doesn't happen like that anymore. No, instead, what you find is that you're going to deal with licensing. There'll be board games. There'll be spin-offs. For example, show of hands, how many people have seen Edge Runners? A few people. Okay. Edge Runners is a spin-off. And I remember when the idea first came up and they sent me the script and said, hey, you want to do this spin-off thing? And I'm going, okay, cool. You know, it's going to be anime. Okay, I'm into anime. We got Studio Trigger. Squee! I was happy. In fact, actually, that was the moment when we found out that Trigger was going to be doing it, and the entire office went squee because they were all big fans. But that involves a lot of sub-pieces, and they have sort of things to go with it. And on top of it, every single one of those things involves legal stuff. And it's not because you're suing each other, but everybody needs to know where their part is, what they're supposed to do, and how that all works. The legal stuff is terrifying sometimes. There's a lot of legal stuff. I lost track of how many trademarks are filed under the stuff we're doing for Cyberpunk. Eventually we kind of made a deal with CD and said, will you guys handle all that? Because, you know, our business office has just gotten loaded. And that was because at that point we were dealing with 41 different countries and all kinds of products, and we weren't going to go flying to China to yell at somebody if they copied it. You know, China's fine, long way to fly. Doing it weekly sucks. So you have a lot of legal that has to be worked out, which defines not just a partnership, but what everyone's agreed to do and how they're going to do it. One of my favorite sub-stories is my business manager, also my wife. We're going through all of the trades, and the trademarks have to be specific. You have to say what category it's in. And we're going through them, okay, we got to do this, we got to do that, and we're going to sign for this, and we got to get rights for that, and all that. And at some point, Lisa said, party hats? And I said, what? Look over at the desk. Party hats? And she's going, yeah, there's a trademark application for party hats. And I'm thinking, Cyberpunk party hats? I can't even imagine it. You know, the Atom Smasher party hat, right? You know, I love it. But years later, that category covered masks and cosplay stuff. And so we have trades on party hats. And my wife occasionally laughs and goes, yep, party hats. Go on and get a party hat, Mike. Okay, so there is a lot that goes with it. But before you can get through all the legal, there's another step you need to deal with. And that is you need to get your vision in sync. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Getting your vision in sync is basically everybody who's going to be working in that franchise has to have not just the idea of what they're going to do, but how everybody in that group thinks. And they all have to be thinking roughly the same way. Because if they don't, you can end up with something really, really weird out there that somebody in the group did. And you went, what? You know, and then you have to go back. Remember I said about all the legal stuff? Yeah, you're back at the legal stuff going, you can't do that, man. You know, we're not having Atom Smasher like have a sitcom here where, you know, he comes home at night and takes off his arms and legs, sits down and says to his wife, so how are the kids? We're not doing that, okay? So you have to get the vision in sync, okay? So let's talk about that a minute. You not only have to see the same picture of what your idea is about, what that thing is going to be, but you have to be willing to see it in sync across all the formats. And over the years of my career, I've been doing this for a while, and somehow no one's caught me doing it, so I keep doing it. What we discover is that more and more formats happen all the time. I'm waiting right now because somebody is going to basically end up doing legalized cyberpunk brain dance. I'm just waiting. You know, I wrote it years ago and I thought this will never happen. Now, with VR and all the other things that are happening, yeah, we could get brain dance. So, you know, save your money now. So you have to get that across a lot of formats, some of which you may never ever guess at. somebody will come to you and go, we're going to be doing this weird thing. And you're going, we never thought we'd be doing that. That's strange. When I started in this career, if you got a video game, that was cool. If you were doing a video game and somebody did a tabletop game, that was really cool. And I remember projects I'd work on, and then like science fiction writers would come up to me at cons and go, so you did one for Roger Zelazny. Can we get a tabletop game? And we're all kind of looking at each other like, well, I guess so. But there's a lot of formats, a lot of ways that you can implement an idea, bring it into the people who want to know more about it. And again, we go back to what Mike said years ago about owning the end cap. When you walk around the Games Workshop end cap, you're looking at every possible way a fan can get into Games Workshop. And, Mike's job is to make sure it's all there in one place. You walk in and go, whoa. I was starting to get into Games Workshop, but man, there's a lot of cool stuff. I got to get that T-shirt. I got to get that band. I got to get that, whatever. But it all has to sync up. It all has to work together to get that push. Okay? Have I left anybody behind yet? I talk fast and not in Polish. Okay. So you have to be prepared to get involved if you want what you're doing across all these formats to match your vision. You can't just sort of say, well, it's Johnny Silverhand is kind of like, this, and little time goes on, and you're not involved. And then you look up one day and you go, what the heck? Johnny's a girl? What? When did that happen? Actually, there's a great side story on that. Originally, Johnny Silverhand, because he was, pretty 80s, had a blonde mullet. Okay. And back then, that was looking cool, right? He looked like Daryl Hall. And, nobody would have ever said, oh, he's going to look like Keanu Reeves. Really? Are you kidding? But as it turned out, they got Keanu. And my go-boys over at CD seemed to like pulling fast ones on me. They like to see my reaction, right? So we get over, we're in, the studio, we're talking to people, and they go, well, we got somebody for Johnny. And I'm going, okay, cool, but he's not blonde. Okay, well, who you got? Well, we don't want to tell you right now. We want to surprise you. And I'm thinking, oh, man, they got whatever, guy in Hollywood is like, the thing. Chris Pratt is Johnny Silverhand. No. So we're sitting around the hotel in Warsaw. And as I said, my wife is my business manager. She's been doing that for about 40 years. In fact, to be honest, we got married and then we started a company. But she's sitting there, and the only thing they gave us was, well, he has brown hair, and he has been in a band. And I'm going, okay, that could be almost anybody. And I'm looking up, does Chris Pratt have a band? We could be in really big trouble here, And so the next day, Amelia Kodot, who is their media rep and so forth, and our main contact on a day-to-day, I deal with the team, and Amelia deals with my other crews and things like that. So we're actually in the mocap studio, and I'm going, so we're going to see the mocap? And they're going, well, we wanted you to guess before we showed you the mocap. And you could see Amelia going, yeah, this is going to be great. She's like stoked. And I go, I have no idea. Dark hair, plays guitar, maybe, could be. Chris Pratt learned how to play guitar? I don't know. So in the back, my wife looks up and she stops and she says to Amelia, it's Keanu Reeves, isn't it? And Amelia, it's like record scratch. What? And, without missing a beat, because I've been here before, I said, she does that sort of thing all the time, and you'd better get used to it. And it turned out she had put two and two together like Sherlock Holmes and had figured out it had to be Keanu Reeves. And I'm going, it can't be Keanu Reeves. He's done like a million cyberpunk things. Why do he ever do this? He probably never wants to see cyberpunk again. He did Matrix. Why does he want to ever do this? Turns out Keanu really liked working on Cyberpunk 2077. He was extending his lines. Johnny got to say a lot of things that Keanu came up with, and I think it would say this actually, and everybody like, yeah, actually pretty cool. He got into the character. One of the things I'm most proud of is that these characters have really great people to actually portray them as part of the vision. So when Keanu took over Johnny, I didn't have a big problem with it because what he got was the fact that Johnny is really a damaged guy. I once told my daughter, if you ever bring Johnny Silverhand home, I'm going to throw you and him out, okay? Because this guy is messed up. But he's supposed to be, he's a tormented character. That's how he becomes what he is. So what was interesting was that later on, because they love to do this to me, the team over at CD brought over edge runners, and I kind of knew what to see because I'd read the script. None of the other people in TAL at that particular meeting had ever read the script. They just knew, ooh, they got Studio Trigger. Awesome. So we're sitting around, and they're showing, we binged all of Edge Runners. One day, the whole day, just Edge Runners, yeah, and it got better and better and better, and then by the time it ended, everybody in the office, in the conference room was crying, which is the usual response people have to Edge Runners, and not because it's bad, but, oh man, that is really fucking sad. And, they're going, why aren't you crying? I said, I knew 6 months ago that this was going to be bad, so I've been getting myself ready to deal with this. So basically, Nick says, oh, as long as you're, here, we want to show you some stuff from Phantom Liberty. And I had seen, again, the script for Phantom Liberty, so I had an idea generally what was going on. And they open up with a scene where the character, ex-spy and so forth, is sitting on the end cart, and it's beautifully shot. There's golden light flowing in, and you see the end cart moving along, and it's very meditative. And I'm going, yeah, this is really nice. We've really moved up in the world, except, and I look over Nick and go, are we going to get in trouble? Because that guy looks a lot like Idris Elba. He's going to sue us. And he's going, oh, it is Idris. And I'm like, what? So let me get this straight. You went out and got Keanu Reeves, and he's into this, and then you got Idris into it as well. One of my personal favorite film people. And, oh yeah, he was really into it too. In fact, he did some rap stuff on it, soundtrack. And I'm like, okay, but here's the point. In order to bring those people in, the guys I work with had to have a pretty good idea of the same vision I had and the rest of our teams between us had, so that we didn't go, Chris Pratt is going to be... No, I'm sorry, I'm picking on Chris Pratt. He's actually a nice guy, I guess. But you see what I mean, the idea that Hollywood will pick somebody who's hot, not necessarily the person who matches the vision. So you need to make sure that a thing matches your vision. And that means you're going to have to be involved a lot. You're going to be sitting there at the equivalent of 5 in the morning in your pajamas because you're talking to the team. You're going to be flying out to Poland at least 3-4 times a year. And in turn, CD guys will be flying out to Talsorian 2 or 3 times a year. So that involvement is really important, okay? When you invent something that people are going to be interested in, it isn't going to stop with, I got a video game. I can tell my girlfriend now that, I actually have a job. Okay? So whether you're the creator or not, you're going to have to be involved. I've worked on several different licenses. I think the most recent one, oh my God, that was 10 years ago. I worked on Matrix. And I remember, that we were seeing stuff early. The Wachowskis showed stuff up and so forth like that. And part of what I was doing, because I was at that point live lead, is figuring out, okay, how will we make this feel like the Matrix so that we stay true to the Wachowskis' vision? And that was a big chunk of what we had to do. We weren't the creators, but we didn't have the right to just totally mess it up because there were fans who were expecting certain things. The Wachowskis were expecting certain things. And even though we weren't the creators, we were honor bound, if we're going to be good partners, to make sure that this fits the vision, okay? Part of that is picking the right partners in a project. And if you are, lucky to get a hold of some big flashy project, I've done it. I've done this vampire game where you're a vampire bus driver, and if you get that, you better find somebody who's the right partner who's really behind vampire bus drivers, or it's going to fall on its face. So you have to choose the right partners in your project. And we were lucky to partner with CDPR and Cyberpunk. And the funny part was, they were OG Cyberpunk fans. They loved and respected the IP. They played the game to death. I remember somebody brought in their old copy of Polish Cyberpunk and was like, "Well, dude, you don't have a book anymore. Let me get you another one." When we go back to the office. But that gave them a similar vision, and where there were places where it didn't match up, it was pretty easy to sit down with the team and go, well, like Cyberpunks do not carry big silver guns around that look like ray guns. That's not the style. Cyberpunk guns, as I explained to the team, are big, black, ugly, have little flashing red lights that look like eyes watching you. You should, when you pick up that gun, realize that it is almost a nasty sentient being of death. So they saw the same vision. And that made a lot of things we had to do much easier. Make sure when you end up in a franchise that you find partners like that who know your stuff and who care to make it what you want. And if you happen to be the partner on the other side, that you know their stuff well enough. For example, this year I'm taking over the Talsorian side of the Witcher line. And so I'm now getting Witchered up, as it were. And it is my job at that point to be able to answer people, like what somebody in a court of Nilfgaard actually wear. I need to know that because I am trying to be that good partner, just like CD Projekt is that good partner for us. So, when you get in trouble is one that I've seen a fair number of times. IP ownership and the "I invented this" executive. Okay, how many people here are game developers and concept developers? Show of hands again. Okay, so I'll warn you now. You're going to, because if you're dealing with a larger company, you're going to run across an executive who wants to be able to swan around cocktail parties and go, "Yeah, I invented this, man. That's right. I know Keanu personally, and I talked him into this." He had nothing to do with it. But you're going to have the problem of people, particularly the larger the organization, who are going to try to utilize your property to get ahead. So again, pick your partners, and pick partners who, if they've got people on the team who are going to get ego about it, that team will get rid of those people. He'll say, "No, Bob, you did not invent this. Now, go back to your office in the bathroom and shut up." Okay. Next, be prepared to adapt based on the audience. Now we're going to get down to the meat of the matter, okay, in 22 minutes and less. Okay. What do I mean by that? You have to be prepared to adapt based on the audience. Movies, video games, TTRPGs are not the same animal. Anyone who tells you, yeah, you can take it straight across, doesn't know anything about what they're talking about. They all have things that need to be dealt with. And we're going to talk about that because each form has different needs, different types of bandwidth, and different cultural impact, okay? So Star Wars is actually many different animals all at once. And this is how you can get Mandalorian out of old Star Wars, because they looked at the TV audience and they said, we can't really keep doing Luke Skywalker fighting Darth Vader. It's going to get old. But we can do a guy in a Western kind of thing in Mandalorian armor who is stuck with a little kid. Cute little kid. But we can do that because we've adapted, okay? And this leads to something that when I used to teach design years ago, called the triangles of death. My students named it the triangles of death. Professor Pondsmith's triangles of death. Okay, the triangles of death sounds simple, but it's an important thing. Okay, any property has three aspects. It has the financial value, and what I've done in these triangles, I've shown you the smaller it is and the higher up it is, the more important it is in that concept. So if you're looking at it and you're saying, I got a video game out of it, that was better than you got a tabletop game. And if you got a book, you know, as George R. R. Martin could tell you, that's better than a tabletop game. If you got a television show, that's better. If you got a movie, that's looking good. Believe me, when I tell you that's changed, it used to be, you know, the video game was kind of down there with books. Not anymore. If you look at the financial side of it, video games are now more important than movies. They make a lot more money, and they have a longer amount of time. But, second triangle, cultural visibility. Anybody want to take a guess at what I mean by that? Come on. Excuse me. More than that. It is the size, you're right, it's the size of the audience in terms of not fans. For example, you know, it's not going to work if it's just cyberpunk fans. It's going to have to be culturally in the zeitgeist. And believe me, you know, when I go out and see things these days, I go, yeah, we're in the zeitgeist here. Cultural visibility means that everybody, for example, in movies, which has a wide cultural visibility, can say, I am your father, Luke, and everybody knows what they're talking about. So, meanwhile, there may be something happening on TV that a few more people understand. And a video game, believe it or not, we're playing, but we're not memorizing the lines, and your mother definitely didn't memorize the lines. Actually, I'm doing a disservice. My mother and I play video games together. At any rate, books, even less. Tabletop games, you know, we do this and nobody really sees that, okay? It does not have high cultural visibility. So if you have something that's a high financial value in terms of what people spend on it, how much they're going to commit to it, but the cultural visibility is low, you have a problem because you're going to spend a lot of money and everyone's going to go, you did that? What was that again? Okay? Information bandwidth, though, is the killer. All right, anybody want to take a guess at that? This is the one that my students hated. Exactly. Basically, information bandwidth is how much information can you deliver to your consumer, your audience. A tabletop game, you know, I know where the bathrooms are. You'd be amazed at the stuff we had to write up on both Cyberpunk and Star Wars and Matrix and all that. I can tell you where the bathrooms are in Neo's dojo. At any rate, so tabletop games deliver a lot of information, but it catches down to cultural visibility because it's only going to be a limited number of people who are really going to see it in that format. Whereas if I keep going up, information bandwidth, books can tell a bit more. And you can think about, you know, shows you've seen on TV and so forth. And when you read the novel, you suddenly found out things like, oh, you know, that's what happened back then when he was a kid. And that's why he's, you know, crazy now. So books, once again, deliver more bandwidth. Television delivers almost as much bandwidth as books. And the reason is that television is a continual media. So, you know, Saturday rolls around or you're binging all 78 episodes of it. And all those 78 episodes are delivering information, which in turn reaches out, creates cultural visibility, maybe higher than it would normally be. And as the cultural visibility goes up, the financial value for that will go up. So if you got a video game that, you know, delivers that and it's high information bandwidth, that would be great because then it'll be on everybody's lips, even the people who aren't playing video games. Okay, and that will increase the financial value. Movies, pretty good. If you're lucky, this is why there's sequels all the time, because one movie is not going to deliver all the information that will get people up and happy and building cultural visibility and thus increasing the financial value. And then video games. We talk about the idea of the pipeline, but there's a lot of different pipelines besides code pipelines or art pipelines or whatever. And one of them is informational, which means if you want to get people interested, your video game is actually going to do better if it gets a TV show or something that it can improve its cultural visibility by. And thus, its value will go up. So you could have the hottest video game in the world, which is, Triangle Death #1. But if no one's seeing it because it's halfway down the stack, because only people who are into that, then you have a problem. It's not as valuable as you think it is. And then that video game has a problem with delivering all of the cultural bandwidth, all the information bandwidth, because you have a very narrow space. You have to have things you do in a game. You have to have activities. You're not going to stop and have a long, long story about someone's background. In fact, I just watched a seminar yesterday that said, do not sit around and tell everybody about this character's background. They will get bored and leave. She was right. So those triangles of death are basically 3 aspects you look at when you're dealing with a property, because you want to make sure that you've picked the sweet spot. And when you have got a high information bandwidth, you have to start looking at it and going, well, video game's not a really good place to deliver a lot of stuff. So I think I better go get myself maybe a book. If I got a TV show, that would be even better. So, for example, people knew about Cyberpunk 2077, but when Edge Runners TV came out, suddenly a lot of people knew about Edge Runners. My favorite was people were going out in the game then, and they were going to all the places that Lucy and David had gone to, and they're having dates. And I'm thinking, it's not there, man, and besides which, you can't date Lucy in this sim. So, we're working on that. So, those are the triangles of death. Keep them in mind as you're developing. You want to pick the best sweet spot, and if you're at the bottom of one of those, you want to find a way to raise your aspect and your visibility up one of the triangles. Good so far? Okay. My students hated this. I had an exam question. All of you guys will have to turn in a 20-page paper explaining how these work. Ready? Okay, you're not getting an exam yet. All right, then. So, this leads to opportunities, synchrony, and just plain luck. A lot of these projects are just plain luck. But by looking at a franchise, you oftentimes develop opportunities. Sometimes the things work together. Synchrony, for example, is a perfectly delineated thing when you look at Edge Runners and 2077. One is one thing, one is another thing, but they work together. And a lot of people who did not understand the 2077 part of the universe, or, when we were doing Cyberpunk Red books as well, suddenly they could see how that all went together, and they got interested, and they would go to the other part of the triangle to find out. So that's synchrony. You want, in a franchise, the stuff to be tied together in a way where, to quote Mike again, you own the end cap. Somebody who wants to know about Games Workshop and wants to know about Space Marines, they're going to be able to find all the Space Marine stuff they ever wanted. And you want to make sure they've got it. Because if you don't, one of those parts of the triangle isn't going to work for you. Okay? This is one reason why, for example, Workshop is having problems with Space Marine and all the stuff tied to 40K, because most of their area is actually in tabletop games, and they've expanded to books, but the cultural visibility is not high. And, if they finally get a 40K movie with, Space Marines fighting, really nasty things like Necrons, everyone's going to know about it. So they have to deal with the triangle just like you will, okay? And just plain luck. Sometimes, it works out that you walk in and somebody goes, hey, that's cool. Also, sometimes your licensees or other partners contribute to your project and allow you to think of it in a new way. So, we have licensed property people as well at TAL, as well as CD, which has 1 million licenses now. But a lot of times those people come to you as licensees and they go, hey, what if we did this? Trick is listen to them. They may have cool ideas. For example, we did the Netrunner card decks, and that came from somebody outside who was a contributor, and we went, oh, that's much better than anything we came up with. Yeah, let's go do this. So listen to them. Sometimes they're going to be off base, and that's where your knowledge of your vision is what will keep you on track, okay? Also, as we wrap to the last section, 10 minutes out, be prepared for the unexpected third partner. Okay, this is a really interesting one, and partially because all of you sitting in this room are to some extent part of that partnership. Okay, fans. Your fans are a really interesting situation because they're the third partner. They can very easily, because of their interest, boost things up the triangles of death. If you've got people cosplaying Johnny Silverhand, that just moved them up into books and maybe television, which means you have higher visibility again. All good, okay? So, keep that in mind, that the fans are a third partner. You didn't hire them, you didn't bring them in. But, basically, they're there to, come on, give me more time. Stop that. Computers were going to make things easier. What happened? Okay, there we go. Fanfics, headcanons, personal grievances, you name it, will be part of your franchise. If you're successful, everybody's going to want to get in on it somewhere. And they may never have the chance to actually get in there. And, I'm not going to walk into RTG's offices and find some guy who wrote a fanfic sitting in, my desk. So he's still there. That person is still there because they will go on the internet and talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. And they'll write fanfics and shipping. I am driven insane by shipping because, in almost any case, there are people who want to see a good romance. And if you don't provide one, they're going to invent one. And it's going to be a weird one, too. I have been appalled sometimes at the ships I see. You'll say, were you on crack? How did you think that was going to happen? Okay, but they will be part of a franchise when you build it, okay? Whether you want them there, that's really slow. There we go. Boy, this is terrible. Okay. Whether you want them there or not, okay? You're not going to be able to stop fans. And that's not bad. That's good, okay? Because these resources can improve involvement, audience participation, even creative ideas. For example, I watched My Little Pony go from, on 4chan, where it first popped up, and I saw something that said, the mods aren't looking, go post ponies. And I went, ponies? What the hell? So I watched a fandom build up to where they were creating tons and tons and tons and tons of content. And I'm going, how much can you say about ponies anyway, But what I realized is that the team that was making the show, and indeed Hasbro, paid attention to what they were going on. So if there was a pony that looked interesting and everybody had a weird-ass headcanon about it, Hasbro put that pony in, even if that pony showed up for 50 seconds in the show. Audience participation. Everybody's writing fanfics about this one weird pony. Same thing with Johnny, same thing with any character, okay? And they may even have really cool ideas. So you don't want to just say, you're a fan, and I want to listen to you. You want to go, okay, you can't come into my office and take over, but you can contribute, and my trick is managing. And I have one guy, and his entire job is managing our content and audience participation and so forth like that. It drives him crazy. But he has a counterpart at CD, Amelia, and the two of them get together and sympathize because they have to sort what's important, what people care about, because you will get inevitable legal. I invented that pony. Really? Social and mass storylines, you know, how come we don't have this kind of character more? Or how come, you know, we haven't seen this? Or I really think these people should be shipped together, you know, and I'm going to go to your house and stand out with a sign saying, ship A and B, because I love them, okay? They will also create mass storyline directions that also may result. You have to learn to manage that when you're dealing with a franchise, okay? So there's no way to get around that. The cool part, though, is that process will make your idea something that will last for generations. And I mean that literally. I mean, do you know how many versions of Sherlock Holmes there are out there? Unbelievable numbers. You know, I stopped counting at about 50. And even after Arthur Conan Doyle tried to kill him off, even within that period, people were essentially writing the equivalent of Victorian fanfic, you know. I've been looking to see whether or not somebody ever did, you know, shipping for Sherlock Holmes back then. They sure as heck do it now. And Sherlock Holmes has been together with robots. He's been together with women. He's been together with men. He's been together with sentient dogs. Shipping, it never stops, okay? But the good news is, if you can do all these things and build that franchise, you might even have a legacy that, so your great-great-great-great-great-grandkids will know that you weren't just fapping around on a keyboard. You know, well, you know, great-great-great-great-granddad, he invented Sherlock Holmes. And everybody goes, oh, that was cool. You know, instead of, yeah, he was a failure and he spent all his time writing fanfics or whatever, okay? So, you may be able to build something with that lasting legacy. And building a franchise gives you a better chance of building a legacy where your IP, your property, will stand out and be remembered by everybody. I mean, we're still standing around saying, I am your father, Luke. So, 4 minutes. I don't know, we have a lot of time for questions. I'll be around here as well as at the show, and you know, the con willing, you can ask me questions. I'll see what I can do. And thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for 2 questions, if you like.
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
It's up to you, man. It's your hall. I don't own this place.
Of course.
Okay. Who's going to be the first off the ice floe?
Okay.
This always reminds me when I had classes and people would go, you know, I'd say, does anybody understand how to do this particular thing? And I'd be looking around this classroom, which was usually about as big as this, and they'd all be like, he's going to call on me.
Yeah, so I have a question. Right now, the franchises that are very popular, of course, are from the 80s, from the 90s. They've been long going. The original creators might no longer be there. They might get passed around. Things get retconned. Things get changed. Can you talk about a bit about the conflicts that can arise? Did you ever have this kind of conflicts, or do you believe you had the correct idea about the lore and the IP owners had a different idea, and how did you like resolve those?
I lucked out because the 80s were when the CD Projekt guys were out playing Cyberpunk 2013 and then 2020. And so the first time we ever learned about CD Projekt, Michael Nowakowski, Michał Komenau, Nowakowski. Anyway, Michał sent us a letter. In fact, we have it up on one of the walls at TAL. He looked about 12 then, because it was way back there. And he's going, we played it, we really like Cyberpunk, and we really want to do it. So when I showed up to check them out, they were already into it. That's what you're looking for, is somebody who loves the basic premise. What you don't want is the executive who thinks, well, I can rewrite it to make it like this, and that happens all the time. And it further the creator is to that, the more likely somebody will go, well, you know, if I just skin it like this and take that off and do this, it'll be like this. I have lost track of how many people have, companies and so forth, have had options on Cyberpunk since the 80s. You know, it started like 6 weeks after we first printed. But many of them went, oh, well, I can make GTA 9 out of it. Pick your partners. Make sure that they love what you love, but be adaptable to realize that Johnny Silverhand shouldn't have a mullet because that's old and funky. And, you know, they're going to, hey, Johnny looks like my dad back then.
Thank you.
Cool?
All right. You mentioned about the fans and those, the fans, they... Sorry.
Take your time. I'm here.
Fans and their audience participation. When franchise is small, fans feel like they have lots of room to imagine, grow stuff. And as franchise goes, there's some part of the fans, the fan audience that thinks that their vision or their contributions getting smaller and smaller and smaller, with more people, more executives, more partners coming in, chipping into the vision. Do you agree with that whole premise that there's still room to dream, or there's more stuff as the world gets fleshed out, or that?
I think there's room, but you have to always remember that, you know, you and your partners created this and you made it. There's a concept I absolutely loathe called death of the author, because it assumes my headcanon is better than yours, although I did not do the same work you did, and I can invalidate what you did because, well, you really don't know what you were doing. I have bookshelves that are 15 feet long and 10 feet high of the research I went through to do Cyberpunk. So when somebody comes to me and goes, well, death of the author, man, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm going, what the hell, dude? Get over to my office and start reading. So there is a point where you have to draw the line. And again, that goes back to whether you have and your partners have the same vision. And you're going to run across people who have, you know, a different picture or want to take it over. And you don't tell them you can't do it. You tell them, you know, that, well, you better not try to publish it as a, you know, book or something. But if you want to go do a fanfic, cool, I may even read it. There is a point between creators who are putting in that work and fans who are putting in their own work, but it isn't that work, if you understand what I'm saying.
Right, thanks.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm -30, so I made it in time. Okay, hey, thanks everybody for coming out. And I think we're on to whoever's next. So thanks again for coming out.